What is a very interesting or odd psychological phenomena or fact? I had a customer who knew that her entire family had been replaced by actors. Those had gone through extensive surgery and training to mimic their body language, way of speaking and such, while all memories of the relative they replaced had been transferred to them with a chip in the arm. She told me she was a nurse and had witnessed this in other cases. It's really crazy. This actor lives in the house of your relative, looks like him, speaks like him, knows everything that happened 20 years ago. But this isn't your relative. She was 100% convinced of this, not the smallest doubt. Her main concern was what happened to her real family. Only years later I learned this is called Capgras delusion. I hope she got help, and that she could reunite with her family. Don't know if it's connected, but when I was a kid, I remember seeing my older brother get up in the middle of the night and leave the room only for me to spot him still sleeping in his bed. I wondered where my real brother went and if someone had replaced him somehow and later came back to swap again. Growing up, I realized, of course, that weird things happen at night, like being half asleep and such. But I still randomly think about that night, wondering what if. I mostly attribute it to watching The Last Starfighter and having an overactive imagination as a kid. The frequency illusion, Bader-Meinhof phenomenon. The frequency illusion is when you start noticing something for the first time and suddenly it appears that this something suddenly crops up everywhere. In reality, this is not true. A good example is a not currently trending word you heard for the first time. Suddenly you read and hear this word all the time. Tolerance, value systems, and association. Your brain has a tendency to adjust to certain things. People call this getting used to it or getting comfortable. The reality is desensitization. A good chunk of the time people will think something is normal just because of frequent experience or association with something they are familiar with. In reality, it's not that common and can be very wrong. It's actually used to lull people into complacency by easing them into scenario by habit or routine, rather than slow progression. Because the brain uses association for memory or reason, people have a tendency to accommodate things they are familiar with, so the familiarity is used to cause later association. This chain can continue, even though the entire chain of synaptic connects can all be false and take forever to untangle and break down. It's what people mean by caught in someone's web. The neural network of the brain being manipulated in this way is the reason for a lot of disorders and their difficulty in recovery, especially due to bias or the Pygmalion effect. Johari's window is cool too, but I like the dynamic of decision-making between acting and thinking too. Confronting someone with information that is at odds with what their brain is used to stimulates the amygdala in the same way a physical attack does. So telling some old person that what they think the world is like is essentially wrong can be compared to a slap in the face. This can be small things as well. I tried to explain to my father once that people are making money off of YouTube as content creators, and that idea was so outlandish to him that he got angry and loud. My girlfriend at the time was really confused and scared afterwards. We ran into this while taking care of my grandmother once dementia had set in. She kept asking where various family members were. Originally my mother would remind her that person had been dead X years. My grandmother would get angry she wasn't told prior and would grieve all over again. I was in high school, and after watching it enough times I would say they were over on whatever street the cemetery they were buried in was on. She'd handle it better. She knew where they were, not why they were there. Was able to get other family members to follow suit. Daily visits became less stressful for everyone involved. I'm not sure if this is related, but here it goes. My dad was an amazing provider. He and my mom were both incredible parents and partners. I grew up and married an abusive sociopath. My dad absolutely could not fathom the things my ex-husband did to me and my kids, especially after my mom passed away, and it got worse. For a while, the idea was so preposterous to him. He just didn't believe me, but we moved in with him after leaving. All 4 of our kids chose to be with me despite my being poor, living in a shelter, and then ultimately in a 2-bedroom apartment. So that says everything. My dad now has experienced her and seen how we've been affected, but still has so much trouble grasping how someone can be so awful that if we try to talk about it, he gets so angry and stops me from continuing. I understand though. No one wants to hear their child and grandchildren were abused, and even worse, that you didn't believe them while it was happening. I take part of the blame. It's very easy to make it appear like things are better than they are for fear of exacerbating a problem. Years ago, when I was freshly prescribed Vyvanse, I would set my alarm an hour before I had to get up, take my pill and then go back to sleep, so waking up when I had to would be easier. It was a new medicine for me, so it still gave me a ton of energy and drive. I took it one morning, went back to sleep, then the energy hit and I woke up naturally like 20 minutes later. I was full of drive and enthusiasm and pumped about anything and everything. I had zero appetite, powered washed the entire deck, and did a ton of chores, never ate, never was sleepy. I went to bed that night and saw the pills still on my bedtime table. Yeah, I'd love to tape into that again lol. There are actually blood vessels obstructing light from reaching certain areas in your eye, effectively creating a shadow. Your brain filters this out and essentially fills in the gaps so you don't actually see the spiderweb-like network of black lines. However, you can visualize them by shining a light at a diagonal into your eye, not directly, and gently wiggling it about. This means your brain doesn't have enough time to filter it out and you see this spiderweb-like network of blood vessels. Edit. Wow. Waking up to so many people enjoying this neat little trick will put some pep in my step. Thanks for the awards, kind strangers. Smile. Also, a bit more detailed instructions to clarify the actions involved. I find it easier to see this effect in a dark environment, so the contrast of the black shadow against the light is higher. You want to be staring straight ahead and shining the light into your pupil at a 45-degree angle from the side directed at your nose. Phone light will do great. Then wiggle the light in gentle 1 cm movements side to side. Keep this up for about a second at least and you should see them. Hope this clears it up a bit. Here's a diagram of how to flash the light into your eyes. This reminds me of the blind spot trick. So, at the place on your retina where the optic nerve connects, we have no rods or cones. This creates a blind spot. Like in your fun fact, the brain simply fills in this space with whatever is around it. You can find your blind spot by taking a piece of paper, about the size of a note card. Draw an X and a dot a couple of inches apart, with the X on the left and the dot on the right. Close your left eye. Focus on the X using only your right eye. You might have to move the paper further away from your face, or maybe closer. Do this slowly and the dot should disappear from your periphery vision. You can do this with either eye, obviously. Just make sure you are closing the eye that is in the same side as the dot. This is called an entoptic phenomenon, meaning you can see the structures of your own eye. You are also able to see the movement of white blood cells in the vessels in your retina by looking at a bright blue sky. It should look like whitish dots, the white blood cells, with black, dark tails, the red blood cells taped behind it, squiggling around. If you've ever had a bad therapist that your parents sent you to, this can happen. My mom's therapist who became mine did this and it took me years to realize what happened. I don't even think she did it on purpose. She was just bad at her job and shouldn't have taken me on as a client. After months of going to her, I was convinced I had a bedwetting problem that wasn't actually real, and that I had a masturbation problem that wasn't real. For years I believed this. I wore pull-ups every day because I was worried about bedwetting. In confession, I'd always admit to playing with myself, and was so afraid accidentally touching my vagina for fear of some weird masturbation phobia. This is why I roll my eyes whenever someone says they remember something from when they were only a few months old. No, you don't. Your parents told you a story and now you just believe it. It's literally impossible to remember anything from that young. You couldn't have developed a narrative memory of anything from then because you didn't know any form of language yet. When asking for something big, lead up to it by asking for something inconsequential at first, so the person is likely to say yes, followed by slightly larger requests. Once a person has said yes, they feel obligated to keep saying yes, Salespeople do this a lot. If you want something small, start by asking for something ridiculous, so by comparison, the small thing seems trivial. Salespeople do this a lot, too. Also, people are more inclined to let you do something if you give a reason. The interesting part is that it doesn't really matter what the reason is. For example, asking to cut in front of someone at the checkout. If you ask, "Do you mind if I cut in front of you? I just need to buy these things," will be more effective than just saying, "Do you mind if I cut in front of you?" Even though the reason is irrelevant. Everyone is in line because they need to buy things. Brains are weird. For more social psychology facts, subscribe below. Just kidding. Buy a textbook. I'm not a bot. I used to tell my daughter and her friends that serial killers will operate this way. There was one guy who asked a girl to come to his apartment so he could take pictures. Of course she said number. Then he told her he had already taken a few pictures of her and could she just sign a release. His car was parked just outside the mall. This lesser request, she agreed to. He forced her into his car, abducting her and killing her. I've had people try this shit on me, but thanks to an asshole friend who taught me these lessons the hard way by tricking me for like a year as a young teen, I've developed bad social habits against them. Only the little obvious ones you're talking about. I'm still as susceptible to any real attempts at duping me. As a result, I'm an accidental asshole all the fucking time. This also means my first response to any question is often exactly the wrong response in any casual situation. "Hey, can you do me a favor?" I learned a variation of this in driver's training in the late 90s. Our teacher taught us to take different routes occasionally to our common destinations because of this. In my early 20s, for the first time I had formed such a pattern in driving to work that on my day off I was driving to the mall and I didn't realize until I pulled into my work parking lot that I went to the wrong place. Fact 1. It's common for victims of violent crimes to forget key details, even if they saw everything, because their brain is focusing more on how to survive than how to identify the perp. It's rare for prosecutors to have a victim who remembers everything about the perp or the place, which makes the trial difficult because we often assume that victims will remember all the key details. In fact, they're more likely to remember minor details like smells and sounds. Fact 2. If you keep the first and last letter in every word in the same spot but rearrange the middle letters, your brain can automatically figure out the words. Tachyphylaxia. Essentially, under situations of extreme stress, your mind starts processing information at such a high rate of speed that time seems to slow down in your perception. Victims of car crashes experience it. I experienced it during my first firefight in Afghanistan. It was like the entire world was slow motion. Famously, you saw Tom Hanks' character Captain Miller in Saving Private Ryan experience it during the Normandy landing sequence. I've experienced this when I was in high school. I was driving with some friends of mine during the winter months, and our car slid into a tree. Right before we hit the tree, I distinctly remember time seeming to slow down as we plowed through the tree. It was a small tree. The whole thing took about 3 seconds, but it felt like 30 seconds to me. I remember the moment right before we hit the tree, and the moment right after when I was running away. The friend wasn't supposed to be driving people yet because we were only 16. I didn't realize this was an actual thing. I've got a super lame example of this. I was running down a steep hill. About halfway down I realized I did not have control anymore. Gravity was accelerating me and I wasn't sure I could move my feet fast enough to keep up. Everything slowed down and I was trying to decide if I should dive and try to control my fall. I looked to the left and it was clear. I looked to the right and there was a grate I would hit. I started thinking about how to fall to best protect myself when I reached the bottom and stopped safely. It was probably about 4 seconds from the first "oh shit" until I was at the bottom, but I put a lot of thought into what to do in that 4 seconds. I've been a lifeguard for 10 years and the first fatal drowning I responded to was like this. I'd probably called 911 about 200 times prior to that incident, pool with a lot of injuries off the diving tower, but when we were actually doing CPR, it felt like the ambulance took 30 minutes to arrive. rather than 3. I specifically remember asking, yelling "Where is the ambulance?" at the poor girl who was on the phone with DMS. We were like 2 cycles into CPR, so maybe a minute max, but that minute felt like 10. It was exhausting. This happened to me a couple of times. The first time was when my brother had a seizure. We didn't know he was epileptic and just found him on the bathroom floor struggling to breathe so naturally it seemed like a life or death situation. Second was when my dad choked, which absolutely was a life or death situation. EMS arrived in a few minutes each time, but in my mind it was about 30 minutes that I was trying, and failing, to render first aid. I'm in Tahoe, and when the Caldor fire started to get really close, a lot of animals fled into the basin. I was on my way home from work one night, driving about 60 miles per hour, when I saw movement to the right of the car. Thinking back now, it had to have been in the distance, but I swear I saw it right next to the car at the edge of the headlight beam. Next thing I know, a juvenile bear ran into the road, got scared and started running in the road in front of the car, and then veered off to the left to go up the hill. Still don't know how I processed all of that in enough time to slam on the brakes and not hit the poor guy. Hit the brakes so hard my foot hurt for a good 5 minutes. Thank you, brain. It would have crushed me to run over one of our beloved bears. In the world of restaurants, this is called the walk-in of forgetfulness, where you go to the walk-in fridge for something you need, open the door and immediately forget why you went to the walk-in. So you return to your station and 5 minutes later remember what you needed, so you go to the walk-in to get it. Depending how baked you are at work, this cycle can repeat itself a few times pretty easily. I have STAM, stands for Severely Deficient Autobiographical Memory. I don't know of anyone else who has this condition, and there's only about 2 articles I could find about it on Google. It's not serious and was not caused by childhood trauma that I'm aware of. I had a safe and fairly loving upbringing. It basically means I lack the ability to revisit any long-term memories. I know that certain things have happened, but I can't go back and watch it in my mind because I didn't store the experience. There are a handful of exceptions, which are mostly recent memories. I had my 21st birthday party 2 years ago and I don't remember anything that happened during it, but I can see the photos. Seeing photos and videos of myself is super weird because it's like watching someone else, because I don't remember doing the thing. This also means I have no perception of my past self, and I don't feel connected to the person I was even a year ago. I know my personality is pretty much the same, but I also know I have changed an awful lot in the last few years, and I think some people think I'm trying to be a different person or something. I'm not. I'm just working solely with my present self and growing how I see fit. It's kind of upsetting that I can't relive most of the good things that have happened to me, but it also gives me a sense of peace because I can't relive the bad things either. That said, I have a very strong imagination, and I've fabricated and remade past events in my head to fill in the gaps, even though I don't use those imaginary scenarios for anything. It's very odd. It's frustrating trying to explain this to people, so I no longer try to unless I'm comfortable with and trust them. Most people brush it off and say, well, they're in there somewhere, you just need to find them. No, they're not in there. Nothing is in there, and memory triggers usually do nothing for me. I think a part of it may be because I have ADHD, and for me it has caused an overactive mind, which takes precedence over what's happening in my physical environment. I think I've spent so much of my life in my head that I just haven't recorded any memories of my experiences. Anyway, that's my psychological anomaly. Terminal lucidity. Terminal lucidity is a term coined by German biologist Michael Nem, that refers to an unexpected return of mental clarity and memory, or suddenly regained consciousness that occurs in the time shortly before death in patients suffering from severe psychiatric or neurological disorders. 1, 2, 3. This condition has been reported by physicians since the 19th century. https://n.wikipedia.org/wiki/terminal_lucidity. This one breaks my heart a little bit. Many have noticed loved ones suffering from Alzheimer's return to a normal just before passing. It is rumored that the original singer of Mayhem had this, and that's why he acted so different from everyone. He used to bury his clothes and keep dead birds in bags. Before a concert he would sniff the birds so he could be closer to death. He was beaten near death as a teen, and that's when he became obsessed with death. He obviously never sought therapy, but he's believed to have had this condition. It created black metal but led to his eventual suicide. He was definitely one gone too soon and was known affectionately as Pell by his friends and family.